why we're running this webinar. So we're a national road safety charity here in New Zealand, and we launched in 2011. We're also part of the International Charity Break, which was founded in the UK in 1995 and is celebrating its 20th birthday this year. We've got two key objectives: preventing road deaths and injuries through educational initiatives and supporting people that have been affected by crashes through our support services. We work with relevant professionals both on the prevention side and in our support work, and we're really keen on sharing best practice. We feel this is really important for supporting people who've been bereaved to help ensure they receive the best support possible, which is why we run events like this. So this webinar isn't just relevant to supporting people bereaved in road crashes, so it's also relevant to all kinds of sudden bereavement. So I hope you find all of the information today useful to your work. Our current support services for people bereaved in road crashes consist of two books, a picture book for children and a book on coping with grief for adults. Both of them are free of charge to families bereaved in crashes and can be ordered from Break. Victim Support and some other support organisations in New Zealand also distribute these books on our behalf to families that need them. So if you're wanting to order them, for professionals we just charge a small amount to cover the cost, but we keep them free to the bereaved families. And we can also ship them overseas, so if you're not in New Zealand but the book would be useful to you, you can still order them from us. If you do want to order copies, if that would be useful, or you want more information on the books, there are contact details at the end of today's session, or you can leave your details on the feedback survey at the end. We're also looking to further expand our support services to help people affected by crashes, but as those of you who work in charities and public sector too will know, it all comes down to finding funding, so that's a plan for the future for us. So on to our speaker today. I'm delighted to introduce Stephen Regal. Stephen has spoken for Break in the UK before on this topic, and we're extremely grateful to him for giving up his evening in the UK to deliver this webinar for us. He's the Director of the Centre for Trauma, Resilience and Growth at Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. He's an Honorary Professor at Nottingham University and a Senior Fellow of the Institute of Mental Health in Nottingham. He's got more than 30 years' experience working with victims of trauma and traumatic bereavement, and his time is divided between clinical and teaching activities. Since 2005, he's also been a member of the British Red Cross Psychosocial Support Team, assisting UK nationals affected by incidents abroad. He's the co-author of Post-Traumatic Stress, The Facts, and was awarded an OBE in 2013 for services to victims of trauma. Whilst a lot of the case studies that Steve will use today are from the UK, a lot of the information that he's providing we hope will be of interest and use to you wherever you are. So I'm going to bring him in now to the session. Hi Steve, can you hear me?
I can indeed, Caroline. Well, I'm assuming everybody else can hear me too, or not just you.
Hopefully not just me. I can certainly hear you, so that's great. So what we'll do is, as we did before, I will change the presenter over to be you, so that you can show your slides. So you should get a box appearing asking if you're happy to show your screen.
Yeah.
That's great.
So
I'll just wait for that to come up on our screen. So have you clicked on that box?
I clicked on the box,
Maybe
yes.
Okay. Apologies everyone, that just seems to be not working temporarily, so I'm just going to try it again.
Do you want me to come out of this?
If you come out of your slideshow, and I'll just we'll just try it again.
Show my screen?
Yeah. Okay, we can see that now. That's great. So we've got your first slide up. I'll hand over to you and mute myself so we can just hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen. That's great.
So that's all.
Okay.
We're good to go.
Yep,
Right.
that's great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for that very generous introduction. Well, this is really weird. I've never done one of these before, so I'm also very nervous, not least because I've never done a presentation in my pajamas before. No, please erase that thought from your mind. I'm very privileged to be asked to do this and to do it to an audience a considerable way away. Greetings to everybody in New Zealand, Australia and Tonga, Indonesia, Pakistan. I think I've included everybody, hopefully. Hopefully it will be a useful webinar. As I say, I'm new to this, so you'll have to be kind to me in your feedback. Just a little bit about the service that I work in. Some of you may be familiar with the way the NHS works and the setup here in the UK. Nottinghamshire Healthcare is the mental health service for the whole of Nottinghamshire here in the UK, and our centre is a very small specialist unit. And essentially we have 3 or 4 main activities, which is to provide a service for victims of trauma across the board. So we see people who have been involved in road traffic collisions, people who might have been involved in industrial accidents. We see people from the emergency services, such as the police and fire and rescue. We're also the veteran services for the county. So we see a number of ex-servicemen as well as refugees, asylum seekers, etc. Part of our work also, in my work individually, has been to work with the British Red Cross and the International Red Cross in disaster areas. So I have some experience of that as well. So I also need to make an apology because I'm in the throes of man flu, as it's known here, which means I've got a really bad cold. So if you hear me sniffling and coughing, I do apologise. So, okay, without further ado, the plan was to talk about common responses to trauma and traumatic bereavement, risk vulnerability factors, particularly in relation to people who are traumatically bereaved, and I'll define that in a second. Why the need for early interventions? I'm a passionate believer in early interventions, and I'm happy for people to email me if they wish to have a little paper that a colleague and I, my colleague Atle Diragrov in Norway, wrote about early interventions. What's currently offered, and it's variable, I have to say that, forgive me for using my UK experience, but essentially I know that it's so variable internationally in terms of what people are offered. So if there are things that I say about what doesn't happen here, and it may happen in wherever you are, then of course I hope you'll allow me some leeway with that. I've looked at some case examples. I think that's the best way to put flesh on the bone sometimes. I use the word complex grief, and I had this discussion with a colleague the other day, and have it frequently actually, about people describe complex trauma. And this idea between type 1 and type 2 trauma, which is type 1 being the single episode, the assault or the sexual assault, the motor car accident, or being involved in disaster. And then type 2 trauma is often the prolonged events, such as being held hostage or being abused over a period of time. And there's been an interesting discussion in the UK here, and I was glad to see that Chris Bruin, who has written extensively about trauma here and is involved in the revision of the ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Diseases guidelines on, particularly on post-traumatic stress disorder, is viewed that it's not the event, it's the presentation resulting from the event. And I think that's very accurate, because I've seen people exposed to a single episode trauma who are presented with extremely complex presentation for a variety of reasons. And also, if you have a complex trauma, there's a sort of implication that this is a simple trauma, and as you probably will all know, there isn't a simple trauma, if you like. I'm going to talk about structured social support and what I mean by that, and some strategies. And I'll then mention post-traumatic growth as it's the research theme within our centre, and also something we try and work with in therapeutic in exchanges with our patients or clients. Traumatic bereavement. Any loss is traumatic. But I always think of traumatic bereavement as something that's sudden, violent and unexpected. And I think all of you listening and watching this, and as you listen to this, will be thinking about specific things that you've experienced in terms of the people you've been seeing or the events that you have been working with. So this is how I would define traumatic bereavement, as something sudden, violent and unexpected. I use this now. This shows a lorry which is on its side. The next slide shows where it came to rest. What happened was, this happened 48 hours ago here in Bath in the UK. This lorry careered down a road and it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just outside a school in Bath in southwest England. And it careered into 4 people and crushed a car, killing 3 people in the car, and of course tragically killing a 4-year-old. So it's something, whilst we, it's, bereavement and traumatic bereavement is something that we see on a daily basis. And I just thought, this kind of summed it up in terms of the suddenness and the violence and the unexpectedness of the events, about how the lives of people are shattered by this experience. There's different types of presentation, of course. Normally at the end of a session like this, people would have the chance to argue and fight with me about definitions and things that I've said, but I kind of feel a bit safer now. But hopefully, some of this may have some resonance for you. Obviously, people who are bereaved, but people who are bereaved where they're present or witnessed it, and that's more unusual generally. More common is not witnessing something. And then some people would be injured and have witnessed the person being bereaved. And I saw this extensively in the tsunami, in the South Asian tsunami of 2004. Many people who were injured in hospital also were bereaved and witnessed their loved ones being swept away or killed by debris. And then people who are not injured but witnessed it. And this would be people who might, an example of this would be people who witness close friends or loved ones die in something that might be like a major disaster, or as in the football disasters we've had over the years. So there's a variety of presentations in this, but most people who experience a traumatic bereavement, it's the phone call or the knock on the door. Very rarely do they see well, it's more the exception than the rule that they will see. Just a few images here, which I'm just going to whiz through. And this was an incident that happened here in 2010, where the rural area of Cumbria, which many of you will know, or some of you will know as the Lake District here in England, essentially a very beautiful national park, which has a population scattered over very picturesque villages and hamlets. And a man called Derek Bird went or travelled around, killed 12 and injured 25 people. And of course, as the headlines say, included family, colleagues and strangers. And this is one of the impacts that it will have on communities, if you like. And as you all know, there have been events like this around the world. This is the image. Some of you may recognize it, some of you may not. It's families who are going across to the island of Utøya in Norway to visit the scene. My colleague Atle Deregrov, his centre in Norway, has been instrumental in working with the survivors of the Otoyo shootings, and they were very proactive, I should say, and this is where my passion for early interventions comes in terms of setting up the support from a very early stage. I think in a lot of countries, I think in very populated countries like the UK, where we have generally accepted very sophisticated health, social services, etc., often there are turf wars about who should do what, to whom, and what should be provided. And there didn't seem to be this in Norway, which actually affected the whole country, because Norway has the average crime rate of a small village in England or a small town in New Zealand or Australia. It's very rare that something like this happens. This happened on the island of Jersey, again, where a community is affected by the death of 6 people who were stabbed. I go to Jersey on a regular basis, on a yearly basis, to do some training with the police force, fire and rescue, and the ambulance on providing peer support. And it was very clear that this had a profound effect, not just on the police, but the ambulance service who had to respond on an island where generally nothing like this would happen. The death of Lee Rigby here in a very public, who's a soldier murdered in Woolwich, very public murder which was televised. And again, the modern media introduces this and brings it into our homes. And this has an impact, I think, for children. I've just spent some time with the local barracks here in Nottingham, where we spent some time with the welfare officer and the padre and the nursery staff working in the nursery about how they, what should be done with children in terms of watching stuff on the news. And of course we have Syria, which is in the news almost on a daily basis, where this is a national sense of loss and bereavement on a massive scale. So a huge number of presentations. And I'll mention this. This is Aberfan in Wales, whereby a slag heap of coal descended on a school, and there were 116 casualties, children, 28 adults. And the compensation paid to each family was £500, and the prosecutions were none. And I was thinking about the Pike River mining disaster, which was the worst mining disaster in New Zealand since 1914. Whereby charges were originally brought against the owners, but later dropped, and $5,000 was paid to each family. And it's often seen that man-made disasters have a greater impact in terms of recovery on individuals and families, because in a sense there are different, it's different to the act of God, if you like. I'm never sure about this. I think, loss is loss whatever the circumstances. And I think each individual circumstance, I've never seen people with exactly the same presentation. There's often similar presentations and resonances and things that people can take away from others' experience, but everything and every situation is different. Interesting, the NICE guidelines here in the UK, which are now accepted internationally. There's been a lot of controversy about early interventions, and I don't want to spend time going into that now. By and large, this is centered around the debriefing debate, which sadly has obscured what we should be offering to people in the early stages following exposure to trauma. And what they say is that they recommend the good practice of providing general practical and social support and guidance to anyone post-incident. And that support and guidance is likely to recover reassurance, but immediate distress, information about the likely cause of symptoms. And this is what we've tried to build in what we call structured social support when we've seen families affected by homicide or traumatic bereavement. Firstly, some common responses to a traumatic event. This is not meant to be inclusive, and there'll be others that people can think about, but I wanted to talk about trauma in general rather than traumatic bereavement to start with. Most of these will be present to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the nature of the event, proximity, and a variety of other factors. The most significant risk factor generally is avoidance, behavioral avoidance, where we're human beings, we don't like pain, we don't like thinking or talking about something which is awful, and we will do our best to avoid it. And I think in the early stages that's understandable and quite reasonable. But what we do know that avoidance over a period of time will, as surely as night follows day, lead to problems in the longer term. So that is one that really should be watched out for and monitored, and people should be encouraged to monitor that. The risk factors, the list up there is generally accepted, and for most of the research, as being key risk factors in terms of people developing problems following exposure to a traumatic event. Just a quick sip of water there. It started to feel really dry. One of the key things here is social support. All the research evidence, and this is what should be remembered when the arguments come up about debriefing, to debrief, not to debrief. And as I say, I won't go into it here, but what we do, we provide that sort of service for our staff in the hospital. We're a big hospital, we have, or over many sites, we have 8,000 staff, and they're often exposed to violence, being held hostage, suicide, etc. We do provide them with post-incident support, peer support, but we term it as social support. And all the evidence is that social support is the key and most effective protective factor for after trauma and stressful life events. And the lack of it is a predictor of long-term problems. So that's the one that should be, that's in a sense is my reasons for saying early interventions and social support, but how do you structure that? The course of reactions, essentially you have an event, whatever that event might be, usually say 4 to 8 weeks, where there be common reactions as we've just looked at. And then one of two things happen. People either improve and those reactions would start to abate. Some people would get much worse and those things would start to get worse. It's usually through avoidance that happens. Some people would fluctuate, and that's again people who avoid part of the time but not all. The direction of travel and somebody's, or the individual or family's even psychological trajectory will depend not just on the event, but on pre-trauma factors, in other words, the risk factors, and post-trauma factors, which could be anything, any of these. Now, again, this is not meant to be an exclusive list, but if you add the pre-trauma factors to the event, to the post-trauma factors, then you will get a good sense of somebody's psychological trajectory. And I would argue that if you see individuals or families early, can make a good assessment of their risk and vulnerability factors, coping strategies, previous resilience, you can predict the psychological trajectory. I'll just throw this up here, and I might leave it in the slides that I send as a PDF, because this was in the Times, and Matthew Paris, who was an ex-MP and a journalist, and it kind of, if you like, sums up the debate about how we should deal with grief. And what he was saying here is actually, I'll grieve if I want to, don't tell me to move on. And I don't think that people are told to move on, but I think it's just an example of how what the strong reactions that it tends to arise. Okay, common responses to traumatic bereavement. You have sadness, anger, rage, shock and numbing, guilt, anxiety, tension and restlessness. And this is where it starts to change from common reactions to trauma, this pervasive fear with the anticipated threat towards self for others, that sense of vulnerability. You'll find this in families, that people will want to guard, watch over others, be constantly hyper-vigilant of their whereabouts, compulsive behaviors of self-protection, needing tangible reassurance for safety of others, Behaviours and emotions directed towards retribution, especially if the family member has been murdered or family members have been murdered. Reconstructed memory as event not witnessed. One of the case studies, I'll come back to this when I talk about the case studies, about people have memories that they construct even though they may not have seen something. Of course, difficulty sleeping, impaired concentration, irritability, and of course, avoidance again. So, and the course of these, what affects it is, you'd say 6 to 18 months, often longer. Pre-trauma factors again, post-trauma factors could be any one of these, which will again affect the trajectory. And the trajectory is not straightforward in traumatic bereavement. The trajectory is often one which is variable. It's not a smooth path. This is interesting because there are two studies. One was done in America with seeking to support people within 6 months of a traumatic bereavement. And people were asked if they wanted to join the support group or have some support and help following the death of their loved ones. And many people took, or the study, in this particular study, a number of people took this up. It wasn't a huge number, but people took up the offer of help. And then, of course, there was a study done by Murray Parks here in the UK, and he saw families 2 to 3 years after the bereavement. And what's interesting was that in the American study, the families who had help sooner did much better in terms of outcome than in Murray Parks' study. And he acknowledged that, and it sort of lends weight to this idea of we don't rush in early and provide therapy, but it's about how we provide that support. This is the case I was talking about. It's a case that we had here in our service. A lady named Sandra, following the traumatic bereavement and murder of her 2 children by a husband who committed suicide. Every indication that she was due to be the subject of, or she was going to be murdered too. She then suffered a back injury at work in 2003 and is now registered disabled. And in many ways, this was her coping mechanism. She used to run and swim. She remarried a supportive husband, and she's done really well throughout all this. But one of the things that she did describe when I saw her was that she saw 3 figures hanging on a landing, and she'd never seen the dead bodies of her children or her husband, and she in fact lived in a bungalow. So this was something that she just had in her head from what she'd heard and what she'd been told. Interestingly, she only received criminal injuries compensation, which she was entitled to and she could have applied for, in December of last year, because quite frankly she didn't even know it was available. And it was an emotional moment in the session when she and her husband came and told me about this, because clearly they wanted it and they were putting it in trust for the 2 children they have now, and also to have a memorial for her 2 children, her previous 2 children who were murdered. And this is what she said about the images and nightmares. We did some work on this. For those of you who might be familiar, we used the EMDR with this, and she still has dreams, but she can say the word hanging or hung, and she has moved on considerably. Her losses now are the children are moving away from home, and that's a different type of loss, but she's now struggling with that. Other reactions would be changes in mood perception, mood regulation, perceptions of the perpetrator, relationships with others, changes in systems of meaning, very understandable. Loss of faith, sense of hopelessness and despair. Why me? Changes in relationships, an exacerbation of existing problems and issues, which is often very common, and the development of other adverse psychological reactions. Not every time, but these are some of the things. Again, this idea of shattered assumption, that the impact of a traumatic reaction is exacerbated by the shattering of basic assumptions about the self in the world. The belief in personal vulnerability. It'll never happen to us. It won't happen to us. We see it on TV. It happens to other people. It would be difficult to, or it would be to think about the conversations happening in that street in Bath, because we had a similar incident just before Christmas in Glasgow, where 6 people were killed. So this idea that it happened somewhere else, not to us. The perception of the world is meaningful and comprehensible. In other words, things will make sense in general. However, things don't, and a positive view of self and others. And this can happen to individuals, it can happen to families, it can happen to communities, and in extreme circumstances can happen to countries. If you think of America after 9/11, how their personal belief, personal vulnerability was completely shattered. Their perception of the world was not meaningful anymore, and the positive view of self and others, they battened down the hatches, and everything was a threat. Another case about Brian and Sally. 15-year-old son was killed in a road traffic collision. Both parents at the scene. They developed this, and when I saw them, their son would have been 19, and they hadn't seen anybody because the general view was that they weren't eligible, inverted commas. One of the interesting things in the UK is that we have a national health system that you only get seen if you are ill. So if you're seen, or as a result of traumatic bereavement, you tend not to get any support unless it's through the service you might receive in hospital, through the clergy or the chaplaincy. When you go home, there may be nothing that you will be able to access, except through the voluntary organisations. And what's interesting, though, if something big happens and they scale, people are offered help almost immediately. And this is, for me, has always been something I've struggled with. Another case of Sheila, again seen 3.5 years after the event. One of the things I've noticed, and I've often asked people when I've finished working with them or we're coming to the end of the sessions, what would have been helpful for you if you knew then what you know now? And to a man and woman, almost every one of them say, I wished I'd have got help sooner. I wished I'd have gone to my GP sooner. And it makes sense to them that most people do not know, or they don't understand what is happening to them. They experience a range of reactions and they can't articulate this, they can't put words into this, they can't build a narrative around this. Another case of a mum who I still have contact with, and she's very supportive to others and has set up a charity in Sri Lanka for young girls. Her daughter, Rosie May, and there's a website, you can see if you Google Rosie May story, you will see it, it's a public website. And this is a very complex case in the sense of happening in a small village. But the parents were saying, we don't want therapy, we want help and support. How do we deal with the children? Rosie May would have been 21 last year. What do people want? And eventually, this is invariably what they find, and this is research done by Atle Dyregrov in Norway with bereaved families. And I still feel this to be true. This is indeed what people do want. Story of Derek. He was working with his nephew, who was like a son to him, and something went wrong with the cherry picker they were on, and rather than descend, it descended, and his nephew was electrocuted in front of him. Here's a man who's never had any time off work as a result of this traumatic bereavement. He's still symptomatic, interestingly, but there are so many things that have changed with him. One of the things that we have, we use a questionnaire on post-traumatic growth, simple 18-item, which ideally you ought to be able to give to people before anything bad happens, but sadly we can't do that. But in this particular case, one of the things that we talked about was that revisiting the scene, if practicable and if it's appropriate, we'll try and do that. And I saw him about 3 months ago, basically for a follow-up meeting, and he was quite animated, and his wife said that there was something interesting had happened, and the interesting thing, he'd always resisted me going back to the place with him. He worked in a tool hire firm, and the chap came in and gave him some tools to mend and said he had some more at home. And Derek said, "Oh, it's okay, I'll come and pick them up. Don't worry, I'll come and pick them up from you." And it wasn't until he picked these tools up and was driving away that he realized that this was only 60 meters away from where this happened. It's because the area had changed so much in terms of the way the fencing was in place, the hedgerow had changed. And that's often what you find when people go back to the place of a trauma, that things do change, and it's getting the memories of then versus now. Assessment is key, and much of this will be included in the guidance that Caroline talked about. I'm a firm believer that if something's working, that you don't fix it. And it's this assessment of the family, individual and family members. We talk about the appointments and the contact. It's not therapy, but we talk about its support. And we talk about the support based on previous knowledge and experience of families, similar but not the same experiences. And we do talk about other families, and we obviously don't give details, but it is comforting because they ask us, every family asks, how do people cope with A, B or C? Structured social support, pragmatic psychological support. People who showed increased frequency and intensity should be offered, may benefit from further interventions. And it's an approach that takes account of individual resilience, monitoring responses. And that encapsulates what we do when we would see a family. The structured social support essentially would start with the assessment of the family, the couple, the individual, the formulation of the psychological trajectory. We talk about risk factors, vulnerability factors if possible. We talk to them about previous families we worked with and how things have worked out with them. It's based on information, advice and guidance in general, and that moves to the specific, which relates to their particular case. So what is it about their children's reactions? What is it about their specific case, their specific loss? And we've done this in a circular way of reevaluation, reassessment, support and monitoring. So that's a kind of the model that we would use. And what we find is that generally we would do this in a variety of ways. We describe emotional and physical reactions within the context of their own experience, advising a fear cues, intrusive thoughts, reminders. We use their own examples. We advise about mental and behavioral avoidances. We talk about timeframes because people want to know when will things change. One of the things we often say to families after a homicide is people often expect that once their court case is over, things will feel better. And this is not necessarily the case. Often they'll feel it's a huge anticlimax. And so we kind of prepare them for that. We highlight possible changes in outlook and attitude in terms of their own relationships in the world and others. Encourage the use of other support, reading material, meeting others with similar experiences. And of course, deaths abroad present unique complications in terms of repatriation and dealing with legal systems, etc. But if I was to encompass those the bullet points there, that was in a sense what we do. And each family is taken on its own particular and specific needs. Early conversations, we talk about the approach we're using. We don't have all the answers. We talk about expectations, what are theirs and what are ours. We often use analogies and stories of ours and others' experiences. Sometimes we ask them if they'd like to meet other people who've been through similar events, and we set this up in our little centre. We mention the MDR, but we don't go in with a treatment head on in the early stages. But if we're months down the line, and people are still experiencing vivid dreams, nightmares, and still very symptomatic and need some specific help, then we will do this. We often give them written aid memoirs of the session content, what we've talked about, what we've done, and said, here we go. Once we met session, we'd either post it to them, or people use email now. We would email them and say, these are the things that we discussed in the last session, because often they tend not to take things on board. We do home visits. One of the ways that our mental health services are becoming configured here in the UK is that everybody has to go to a clinic, everybody has to go and see somebody in a consulting room. And if it's a family, that's not possible. In addition, our children and adolescent mental health services often will work with very extreme cases. So they might work with cases of families who have been affected with school refusers, and we have tiers. People affected by trauma and bereavement often would come in tier 1 or tier 2, and these wouldn't be ones that would be seen by our services, which is interesting. And it's not getting over, but coming to terms with. We use some of the metaphors, unpacking and repacking. We talk that, when somebody's been through an awful event, it's not possible to make sense of it, and what happens is that people gather up all those thoughts, reactions, emotions, put them in an imaginary bag and take them away. And what happens is that from time to time they unpack, they repack, and they unpack and they repack. Obviously those are the people that do it most often and do it well are the people who come to terms, in inverted commas, with this. And some people it's just too painful and they would need help with this. And so we kind of set that up and say that this is the process that we're going to be using, that over the process of seeing the family, seeing the individual, this is what we're going to be doing. Interestingly, what we found is our average length of time with families affected by homicide, if we see them within 1 or 2 months, we have to see them for about 15 sessions, 20 sessions maybe. And this tails off considerably unless one member of the family is experiencing really major difficulties afterwards, and that person will still be supported. Families who come much, much later need a lot more, and the recovery, if there's going to be a recovery, is slow, painful, and sometimes very limited. We talk about emotional physiotherapy, about how sometimes somebody may need to engage in some degree of exposure, and how that's like physiotherapy. It hurts, it's painful, but if you have physiotherapy for a broken limb, you're able to use your limb again. You're able to walk again or use your arm. And I'm conscious of the time, so I won't tell you the full story, but I got this from a patient, a Chinese patient who we were trying to explain the process to, and his wife eventually said to him, because he didn't speak much English, as did she, and his son eventually got this through to him, and she said, we use the physiotherapy as the analogy, and she said that he'd understood it as physiotherapy for his heart. So, it's physiotherapy for the collective heart of the family sometimes. And then we talk about meaning, post-traumatic growth, and those discussions will be had in a variety of ways. Routines and rituals, extremely important in terms of the creation and restatement for sense of order and stability. In other words, ordinary daily rhythms for the family, activate social support. For children, it provides continuity and security. Rituals make the unreal real, gives the death a meaningful frame of reference, defines the deceased, new position, identity, and social functions. And rituals have a really important social function, and this is quite well documented in the literature. And we have numerous cases, and again, I'm conscious of the time that I want to bring that have come to mind as I've been talking, but time prevents me from sharing. So I'm not sure, Caroline, how am I doing for time? I don't know if you can hear me. You probably can, but I think we're coming. Am I doing for time?
can hear you. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself at the same time. We're doing okay for time. You've got a couple more minutes.
Okay, I think we're nearing the end here. I mentioned post-traumatic growth. We give people an 89, if often with individuals particularly, or we might give it to a number of people in the family, depending on the circumstances, an 89-item version, and it's in the little book that my colleague Stephen Joseph and I did for Oxford University Press, which we're currently in the process of writing the second edition and including a chapter on traumatic bereavement in there. It's only a little book. It's not meant to be a textbook for professionals. It's for families and sufferers, but the secondary audience is for people who might be the GP or the counsellor, the community nurse, people working in ED departments. But the idea about growth is that these three key factors, and when I talk about Derek's case earlier on when he's lost his nephew, his growth scores have increased, despite him still being symptomatic. His growth scores have increased significantly. And this is interesting. We're not quite sure how to interpret this. The questionnaire has been validated. It has been published. The psychometric properties are good. But this is one of the things we're starting to find in the clinical samples about people who are symptomatic. In other words, they still might have re-experiencing symptoms and maybe experiencing an occasional dream or nightmare. But what they are describing is these changes: greater sense of personal resilience, shifts in understanding about what matters, fresh appreciation of each new day. So this is a really interesting finding, and we don't talk about this as something that should happen in every single instance, in every single case. We have a general discussion about some of the items on the questionnaire about why do you think this is different now to how you felt it before. What's changed in your life? What's allowing you to see it differently? So for us, it's more than just the alleviation of symptoms. It's helping the person to develop resiliency and increase their emotional resources, if you like. And the last slide, you'll all be probably pleased to know. One I use frequently when I talk about early interventions in any context. You can read it for yourself. It's self-explanatory. But I still believe that this is something that is so true. So despite all the criticisms about early interventions for trauma, and people are very adamant about this, I am a firm believer in early interventions, obviously with people's consent and in using this model of structured social support rather than seeing it as therapy. Well, I think that's everything. It's been really interesting doing this because I have the sense of a lot of people out there who are hopefully listening to this and probably gazing out of a window on a lovely sunny day. It's absolutely freezing here at the moment in the UK. Well, it's got a little bit warmer. In other words, it's gone above the zero. And it's just nice to imagine you all in these wonderful, picturesque and exotic places. So I think that's all from me, Caroline, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. That was really interesting. I've heard a lot of information there, which was really interesting to me. So hopefully everybody else did too. I'm sure they did. We've had a few questions through. I'll just change it so that I've got my screen up again, Stephen, just so that means...
Do you need me to take this down?
Yeah, you can do as you wish now. I've got my screen back up.
Okay.
So we can't see your screen, but your audio's still there so that we can still hear you. Because I've had a few questions through already, which is great. If anyone else has got any questions that they want to put to Stephen, then please, you can either put them through, preferably on the questions function, because I've got that open already. You can also use chat. I'll just have to flip between the two, or you can raise your hand, and hopefully that will show up on mine, and we'll try and get it so that you can ask the question directly. That's always possible possible. So we'll just see how it goes. But I'll make a start on the questions we've got through already. One from Josie, who's asked, Stephen, what are your thoughts of the usefulness of journaling for clients who have experienced trauma?
By journaling, I take it you mean asking people to write or keep a journal. And if that's what you mean,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really, really useful. I do it frequently, and there's evidence for this. James Pennebaker's work in the US, which definitely indicated that people who wrote about stressful life events, what they found was over a period of time, these people's immune systems improved. It's almost like getting rid of toxins. And if you think about it, when we worry about something, it just goes round and round our heads. And I say this to people, would you like to try this? And I say it, I tend to do it in a very low-key way, that I don't want to see it. It's not for general consumption, it's for them, so they don't need to worry about spellings and commas and punctuation. If they want to talk about what they've written about, then that's fine. They can bring it and talk to the session. But I don't want to see it because that sets up an expectation. So absolutely, yes, I would think, not everybody can work with it, but some people do, and some people work with it very well. So it's always worth trying.
Great, thanks for that. Another question from Sandy. When you say early support or intervention, what kind of time frame from your experience is helpful to families? It's
actually a very interesting question, because in the UK we have, as probably you do in New Zealand and in Australia, we have crisis support teams, and most big cities here in the UK have them. And if there was a major disaster locally, either something like a terrorist event or a bus crash involving Nottinghamshire citizens, we activate our crisis support team depending on what is needed. And that's sort of within the space of about 3 days, 4 days. But that's a very specific role about support, and that's to work with a family liaison officer, with the police, etc. But I would think probably it would depend on some sort of consensual arrangement, probably within the first month or 6 weeks. Within the first month, I've seen families within the first month, and that's been at their request. Because often when I'm asked, I always say, ask the family first. Because it may be that somebody else thinks they need support, but it needs to come from them. And if they say, no, not yet, or no, we're okay, we don't want anything, and I often say to people, tell them they're not counsellors, which in fact some people, our team's quite, we're a small team, but we're diverse. We have a couple of psychiatrists, visiting therapists, we have social work students, psychology trainees, we have counsellors, and I'm a CBT therapist, mental health nurse by background. So it's really to say what feels comfortable for them. And I've seen families within a week, and they felt that had been helpful. And I think if it's more than 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, I think it's going to be difficult to engage. But having said that, I've seen families then, and it's been okay. So it's a difficult one. But in a major incident, often they're offered it instantaneously.
Great, thanks for that. I've also got a question from Nessa, apologies if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, who's looking for information on how to address or overcome the post-conflict or post-war stress disorders.
This is a really big one in a way, because you're having to deal with so many. I take it you're probably having to deal with cultural issues as well. And I think this is it's a really difficult one to think that you can think of a resolution. I think I've worked over in Northern Ireland for a fair amount of time, and there's no such thing as post-traumatic stress for people who have been through this. It's ongoing trauma. It's an ongoing traumatic stress. They're having to deal with loss of home, family, of place, and there's so many issues that often it would depend. I don't know the specifics in terms of what you had in mind in terms of the question, but I think this is one where community support and involving them, depending on if there are cultural issues here, involving them with cultures, their particular culture, and support in that particular context. I'm not entirely sure I've answered this particularly well, but this one is probably a seminar on its own.
Yes, I think it probably is a whole other topic, isn't it? But if you've got any information that you know of maybe that's available online, perhaps we could share that when we're sending around the slides and the guidance
there are a
report.
couple. Yeah, there's a couple of. In general, there are a couple of organisations, or one in particular. I'm involved with my colleague Atla Duragrov, who has the Children in War Foundation. And if you just Google Children in War, one word, there's resources on there, and you may find other helpful information. Last year we spent a week in Korea delivering the recovery manuals to professionals who have been working with families and children affected by the Suwon ferry disaster. And they've just started to go back to school. So that's the site for some resources. There is another charity that I'm involved with called Escaping Victimhood, and they have a website. So that's Escaping Victimhood. And I think you've got stuff on your own website and Break, so there's a lot of stuff out there. A lot of the bereavement organisations here in the UK do also have information. There's places like organisations such as Winston's Wish and various other organisations. So there's a lot of information available on the web in terms of resources.
Yeah, there's quite a bit out there, and we'll certainly there's some links included in the guidance report that will be circulating, and I'll also look at including some other links in there too with those organisations that you've just mentioned, and Stephen as well, so hopefully that will be useful. I'm just conscious that we are slightly running over time, but hopefully if you are all able to still stay for a couple more minutes, we'll take a couple more questions. I've had a couple of others come through, and then we'll wrap it up. A couple of people have asked about slides as well. Yes, we will circulate a PDF copy of all the slides, and also the guidance report on this topic too, which hopefully will be of use to you all. There's lots of valuable information in there that Stephen's written on this topic, which is great. So I just have a couple of others, and then if other questions have come through which we don't manage to get to, we'll try and respond to those directly following the webinar as well.
I managed to resist coughing for an hour and 10 minutes. It's getting to me now.
No problem. So I've just got one from Carmen, which is during the early stages of providing support, do you think that there's a need, at least for some people, to begin to start developing a narrative around the traumatic death?
Yes, and I suppose it's depending on how that's done and what's used to do that. And I think it's about helping them to understand. It's really that you're talking about helping them to unpack and repack that bag, which they will need to carry on a fairly long journey. And the ideal is that it's not heavy, but it will get lighter as things go on, and they're never going to get rid of everything. That's understandable, but they have to keep what happened. But what they can get rid of is things like the guilt and anger in time.
Great. And Lorne has asked where she can find more research about the impact of timely emotional support. That might be another one where we perhaps provide some links. If you've got
I'm happy to send. I'll send you the paper that Atla and I did. It was in the Journal of Loss and Trauma about early interventions. And obviously there's references in the back there, but I hope that might be a start.
That would be great. Thank you very much for that. And thank you. There's a couple of people who've also sent details of other organisations or things that are available elsewhere that might be of interest to people. So I will collect all of those together and we'll circulate information.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say that you're a rich vein of knowledge for local things in New Zealand and in Australia, and often you can be living 20 miles away from an organisation that you never heard of. So these are by all means look locally for what you have.
That's great. Right, I think we've covered all of the questions there, so thanks very much to everyone who submitted questions. If you do think of something after the event, then you can still email me at break and we'll look at answering those for you as well. So we'll pull all that together. I'll just before we finish, I promised that I would tell you a little bit more about how you can get in touch with Break or order our support resources if those might be of use to you. So I mentioned at the start ordering the 2 support books we provide, and the contact details for me are there at the bottom of the slide, or if you have any questions that come up following the webinar as well. All victim support offices in New Zealand should also have copies of the children's book. So if you're a VS worker listening in and you don't have copies in your office, then please get in contact with me as well and we'll send some out to you. We also send out a quarterly news bulletin with research and initiatives from around the world on sudden bereavement. Many of you signed up for this on your registration form for this event, but if you're not sure whether you did and you want to receive that, then just tick the relevant box on the feedback survey as well. It's Road Safety Week in New Zealand in May, and it's 4th to the 10th of May. There's lots of ways for organisations to get involved and help raise awareness of road safety and of the impact that crashes have on people. The website there is where you can find out more information and register. If you're in the UK, Road Safety Week takes place in November each year, and if you're anywhere else in the world, 4th to the 10th of May is also the UN Global Road Safety Week. So it's still a great time to be raising awareness of road safety and road crash victims and the support of them. So you can still sign up for an action pack if you wish, or go to roadsafetyweek.org, which has more information on road safety weeks around the world too. Finally, we are a charity and we keep our support books free for families, and we try to run events like this for free as well. But if you are able to make a personal donation or to fundraise for us yourself or with your workplace, it is really appreciated. And we also look for companies to sponsor us as well. So you can find information on donating or fundraising on our website, which is at the bottom of the slide here, break.org.nz, or by contacting me. So I hope you found this webinar useful and interesting. Please do fill in the feedback survey when you leave the webinar. It's really useful in helping us to plan future events as well like this. We hope to run more webinars on supporting suddenly bereaved people. So there's an option there to suggest topics if there's things that you would particularly find of interest. As I say, I'll be circulating the guidance reports and the slides from this webinar soon as well. So finally, another big thank you to Stephen for speaking today. Thanks, Stephen.
And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to sign in, whatever time it was for you, wherever you are. So I can't see you, but thank you all very much for taking the time to tune into this. It's been a really interesting experience to me, and hopefully I get the chance to do it again in the future. And I'd appreciate any feedback that you give to Break about the presentation, etc. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Stephen. And yes, I'll reiterate what Stephen said, but thank you all for taking part today. And if you've got any other questions or anything you want to share following the webinar, please get in touch and have a great day.
And do I actually get to say the immortal phrase, thank you and good night?
Yes, good night.
or good morning. Okay, thank you very much. Take care, bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.